Howdy, it's Kyle counting down the top 15 medium sized cities in the US. And there's no official definition for what makes a medium sized city, so I'm just going to use some statistical natural breaks. And there are a bunch of metros in the 400,000 population range, and there are a bunch in the 600,000 population range, but there are very few in the 500,000 range. So I'm going to be using that as my natural break, actually 590,000 and up. And for the top limit, I'm using 1.1 million. So there are a lot of metros between 1 million and 1.1 million, but then none between 1.1 and 1.3. So essentially, I'm doing medium-sized cities between 600,000 people and 1.1 million. At number 15 is Des Moines, Iowa. It's the state capital and has seen some moderate growth this past decade. Its household and per capita income are both pretty average, and it has a below-average housing cost. There's a pretty average poverty rate, but the crime rate is surprisingly above average. But it is a little more cosmopolitan and fun than you might think, and it's got a pretty decent nightlife. But being Iowa, there are no mountains or beaches, and the outdoor activities are very limited. But overall, Des Moines is an above average city and worth its place on this list. At number 14 is Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's had some decent growth in the past decade after losing population in the early 2000s. It has pretty average household and per capita income, but it has pretty low housing costs and a pretty average poverty rate. But one of the major reasons for growth in recent years and a lot of younger people moving there is the Van Andel Institute for Biomedical Research. This is a major player for cancer, Parkinson's, and cell biology research. It's a pretty fun city with a pretty lively nightlife, and surprisingly enough, it's Beer City, USA, with over 50 breweries in the Grand Rapids area. But with little terrain around there really isn't much outdoor adventure, but there are some decent road biking and mountain biking trails throughout the area. So it has a pretty different feel than the rest of the urban parts of Michigan, which are much more geared to the automotive industry. At number 13 is Fresno, California, which is a half an hour north of where I grew up. It's had some high growth this century and has a pretty young population as well. So a lot of folks are coming from the San Francisco Bay Area or the LA area to buy a home in Fresno because they're just so much cheaper than the ones along the coast. It's the number one place in the country for agriculture and major corporate ag, but there really isn't a whole lot else going on besides major ag. But it's not just the crops, there are also ag formulators and other agricultural machinery that are made there. But because it is a major center for ag, you have a lot of fresh fruits and nuts there. You have 6 farmers markets there, which is pretty high, and you have over 20 microbrews in the city as well. So it's not the most exciting city in the country in terms of nightlife, but it isn't that bad either, and it is a nicer place than the people along the coast of California would want you to believe. At number 12 is Columbia, South Carolina, which is where I lived for a few years while going to graduate school. It has pretty moderate population growth, but it has slowed down a little bit since it was growing a lot more in the early 2000s. The household and per capita incomes are both below average, but the housing cost is below average as well. The economy there is pretty stable because the 3 largest parts of the economy are all with the government. So it's the state capital for South Carolina. It's also home to the largest university in the state, and it's also home to Fort Jackson, which is the largest basic training center for the Army. It's home to one of the best zoos in the country, and there's some pretty nice state forests and state parks just outside of town. It's a pretty fun town with some decent nightlife, and there's a really good live music scene and a great barbecue scene. And I do miss that barbecue from the Midlands of South Carolina. At number 11 is Omaha, Nebraska, and it's been growing at a pretty decent clip and is one of the fastest growing cities in the Midwest. It's pretty average for household income, per capita income, and poverty rate, but it does have a below average housing cost. The economy is pretty well diversified, and it's home to several insurance companies, including Mutual of Omaha, Woodman of the World, and the National Indemnity Company. The largest company in the city is Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's huge holding company. But it does have a fantastic zoo and is just overall an above average place. At number 10 is Huntsville, Alabama, and there's been a lot of growth there this century. The household and per capita income are some of the highest in the southeast. And this is to go along with pretty low housing costs, but it does have a pretty high poverty rate and a pretty high crime rate as well. There are more engineers per capita in Huntsville than any other city in the US, and that's largely due to the aerospace and high-tech military industries. It's home to the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, which has rocket propulsion research. It's also home to the US Army's Aviation and Missile Command. But being a major center for engineers, astrophysicists, and the military, it's not the most exciting city in the country. Nightlife there is pretty limited, and there really isn't much of a music scene there either. However, northern Alabama is much more suited to outdoor activities than you might expect, and there are several other Alabama state parks nearby. So because of all the NASA and engineering and high-tech stuff going on, there has a pretty different feel than the rest of Alabama, and it's a pretty nice place. At number 9 is Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I live. It's had pretty steady, moderate growth this century, although it has the lowest income levels of any city on this list. The housing cost and poverty rates are pretty average for the Southeast, and it does have above average crime. In terms of economy, it's fairly diversified, but it's also mostly blue-collar and low-wage jobs. The biggest players in town include Volkswagen, which has a major assembly plant there, and Unum Insurance. However, it's probably most known for the wealth of outdoor activities it can offer. Just in town itself, there are many places where you can go hiking and mountain biking, and it's pretty well known for being one of the best spots for mountain biking and rock climbing in the country, and it's the #1 place for caving in the entire world. So a lot of folks that are moving here because of the outdoor activities, and they're willing to accept lower wages to do it. So whether or not you like Chattanooga often comes down to how much you like outdoors activities. If you're really into outdoor type stuff, and it's a pretty great place to live, and if you're not into that stuff, well, it's going to be pretty below average. At number 8 is Charleston, South Carolina. There's been huge growth this past decade, and I don't think any city in the U.S. has changed more in such a short period of time than Charleston. The household and per capita incomes are well above average for the South and have doubled since 2000. The average house value is $350,000, which is absurd for the Southeast, and it was only $137,000 20 years ago, so it's 2.5 times as expensive to get a house there than it was just at the beginning of the century. And even though the average house value is about $350,000, good luck finding one for under $500,000. The job market there is okay. It's a pretty important spot for commercial shipping, and there's a major Boeing assembly plant there. There's a decent high-tech sector there, and it's also the corporate headquarters to the Piggly Wiggly grocery store chain. It's a very fun city, great nightlife, great shopping kind of stuff, and a pretty decent music scene. But the reason why it's so expensive is that it's a great place to live, and it's right there on the coast, and winters are very mild. At number 7 is Greenville, South Carolina, so the Palmetto State is well represented on this list. 20 years ago, Greenville would not be on this list, but it's improved a lot this century. There's been a lot of growth recently, and the economy is fairly well diversified. Its household and per capita incomes are well above average for the Southeast, and there's a below average housing cost. In terms of manufacturing, it's home to a major Michelin tire plant, and it's also home to Confluence Water Sports, which makes a lot of canoes and kayaks. And being in the upstate of South Carolina, there's a lot of outdoor activities nearby, so you're pretty close to the Appalachians and the Blue Ridge Parkway, and there's several really nice state parks just outside of town. So it's kind of replaced Columbia as the hipster capital of South Carolina, and it's changed a lot. So it used to be pretty rednecky about 20 years ago, but with the diversified economy attracting a lot more younger and high-tech kind of people, the city has changed quite a bit. At number 6 is El Paso, Texas. It's been growing quite a bit, and it has a pretty young population. It has pretty average household and per capita income, but it has very low housing costs and overall very low cost of living. And surprisingly enough, it's the safest city in the U.S., even though it sits along the Mexican border with one of the most dangerous cities in the entire world. It has fantastic climate with over 300 days of sunshine each year, and it's nicknamed the Sun City. It's home to Western Refining, which is a major energy company. It's home to the large Fort Bliss Army installation, and it's known as the boot capital of the world, with 12 boot manufacturings located in the city. But it's a pretty fun city, with the Union Plaza area having some pretty nice nightlife and El Centro having some pretty cool open-air markets. And there's a lot of great outdoor activities right near the city, with Franklin Mountain State Park basically right there in town. And it's also pretty well known for its rock climbing and mountain biking scene. So overall, El Paso is a pretty nice place, and it's got a pretty good mix of Southwestern, Texan, and Mexican culture. At number 5 is Honolulu, Hawaii, and it's been growing pretty slowly, has about the same population it had in 2000. It has a well above average household and per capita income, but it has an extremely high cost of living. It's the most expensive city in the country in which to live. The average house value is $800,000. Although if you've lived there for a long time and you owned your home for a while, that it isn't going to be super expensive, but if you're trying to move there now, well, good luck. In terms of the job market and economy, it isn't entirely dependent on tourism. There are many other things going on there. Its harbor is extremely important and it's a major center for trans-Pacific transport. It's the corporate headquarters and hub to Hawaiian Airlines. And because of its unique geography and geology, it's a major center for oceanography and geophysical research. And it's also a major center for the military, with all 5 branches of the armed forces having a major installation there. Honolulu is also the happiest, healthiest, and least stressed out city in the country, has the second lowest obesity and diabetes rate, and has the longest life expectancy in the US. So it has very high livability rank and one of the highest qualities of life in the world. But just like Charleston, it comes with a price, literally. At number 4 is Colorado Springs. And just like the rest of Colorado, it's experienced high growth in the past decade or so. The household and per capita income are pretty well above average, and the housing costs are just a little above average. The crime rate and poverty rate are both pretty average. In terms of the economy, it's pretty dependent on the military and military contractors. It's home to Peterson Air Force Base as well as the Air Force Academy, and it's also home to the Fort Carson Army installation. It's a decently fun city. It doesn't have the greatest nightlife in the world, but it does have over 30 breweries. And being Colorado, it's of course going to have a ton of outdoor activities, with Garden of the Gods being right there in town, but Pike National Forest, Bear Creek Canyon State Park, Mueller State Park, and Cheyenne Mountain State Park all very nearby. So overall, Colorado Springs ranks pretty high in terms of a place to live. At number 3 is Tucson, Arizona, which has had a lot of population growth this century. And like a lot of other cities on this list, the population is pretty young, and they're moving there because housing costs are pretty low. The household and per capita incomes are both pretty average, but they are below average for the West. And it also has an above average crime rate and above average poverty rate as well. But the reason why Tucson ranks so high on this list, and another reason why so many young people are moving there, is the big high-tech job sector going on there. The area is nicknamed the Optics Valley, and it's a leading part of the country for optics and optoelectronics. So there are several companies there dealing with LED and OLED research, optical fiber, photoresistors, and charge-coupled imaging devices. But it's also a pretty fun town. With a huge university there, there's going to be a lot of entertainment options. There's a part of town called the Main Gate Square. It's just a pretty cool spot for a lot of nightlife and bars and restaurants. And there's a pretty decent music scene there as well. But it also has a decent amount of outdoor activities nearby. So you have Saguaro National Park just outside of the city, but there's also several state parks nearby, as well as Colossal Cave Mountain Park. The only big negative on Tucson is that it gets really hot during the summertime, as you might expect being Arizona, but the winters there are very mild. At number 2 is Boise, Idaho, which is the fastest growing medium-sized city in the country. It has above average household and per capita income, average housing costs, an average poverty rate, and a below average crime rate. In terms of its economy, it's pretty decently diversified. It's home to Micron Tech, which is a major high-tech company for computer memory, data storage, dynamic RAM, and flash drives. It's the corporate headquarters to the Albertsons grocery store chain. And being Idaho, it's also home to J.R. Simplot Company, which is the largest producer of potatoes in the country. But also being Idaho, there's a lot of great outdoor activities nearby, with a lot of great state parks and wilderness areas very near the city. And it's a lot more fun than you might think. The downtown is pretty cool. It's a pretty good nightlife scene, pretty good music scene, and a decent number of bars and breweries. So there's a reason why Boise is so popular. It's just a pretty cool place. It's got some nice scenery, a pretty decent job market, and it's not too expensive to live there. And the number 1 medium-sized city in the entire country is Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's had pretty moderate population growth, and it has a pretty young population as well. The household and per capita incomes are both above average, but the housing costs are below average. Poverty rate is average, but the crime rate is above average. But the job market, including many high-tech jobs, is one of the major reasons why this ranks so high. It's home to Sandia National Laboratory, which is a major nuclear research facility, PNM Resources, which is a major energy company, Applied Research Associates, which is a major engineering company, Tricor Reference Lab, which is a major medical research laboratory, and CVI Laser Optics. So it isn't just high-tech jobs, it's a diversity of high-tech jobs. But it's also a very fun town. There's a great nightlife scene. The Nob Hill area's got a lot of funky shops and restaurants and nightlife. It's the home to the University of New Mexico, so there's a lot of young folks there, a lot of college-oriented nightlife, a lot of breweries, and New Mexican food is some of my favorite in the entire country. With 310 days of sunshine every year, it's a very nice place for outdoor activities. You got mountains right nearby. You had the Sandia Mountains Wilderness, Cibola National Forest, just a lot of cool outdoor adventure type stuff right near the city. And that doesn't even get into some of the cultural and historical things about Albuquerque that I like so much, but just some of the economic and job type opportunities there are why Albuquerque ranks so high on this list and why I believe it's the #1 medium-sized city in the country. So there you have it, the top 15 medium-sized cities in the U.S. And after I put this list together, I was like, wow, this just reeks of bias because I've lived in 3 of these. 2 other ones are in South Carolina where I live, and 1 is my favorite city in the size range. So I was like, wow, this is a big old pile of hot bias. But before you scream bias, here's a list of some of the cities that didn't quite make the list, so they're in this size range. Toledo, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, Allentown and Scranton, Pennsylvania, Springfield, Massachusetts, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Little Rock, Arkansas, Wichita, Kansas, Bakersfield, California, and a few others. So it's not that I'm really biased towards the ones that I like in this list, just they really are actually better. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in hearing more about U.S. geography, travel across the country, road tripping across the country. There's a lot of geography stuff from a nerdy perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out.